The road was quieter than she remembered. It stretched endlessly ahead of her, lined with skeletal trees that whispered in the cold evening wind. Their dry leaves scraped against each other like old secrets refusing to stay buried. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the edge of that road, her trembling hand gripping the worn leather handle of a single suitcase. Behind her, the mansion, 42 years of her life, stood behind those tall iron gates. 42 years reduced to silence, the gates closed with a final, hollow clang. She didn't turn back. She didn't turn back because she knew if she did, she might break. The air smelled faintly of dust and old roses, the kind that used to bloom in the garden she had planted herself. Her fingers brushed instinctively against a silver locket resting against her chest. It was cold, heavier than usual, as if it carried not just memories but grief. Inside that locket were two tiny photographs, one of a young woman with hopeful eyes, and one of a man who had once promised her forever. Eleanor, you've been adequately compensated. The lawyer's voice echoed in her mind like a cruel refrain. Cold, detached, final, adequately compensated. Her lips trembled, but no tears came. Not anymore. She had already cried everything she had. In that sterile office that smelled of polished wood and indifference, sitting across from strangers who spoke of her life as if it were a transaction, a settlement, a conclusion, a dismissal. Her husband, Arthur Whitmore, was gone, and with him, the illusion of belonging, the mansion, the estate, the legacy, all handed to his children from his first marriage. Children she had raised, children she had fed, clothed, comforted through nightmares and heartbreak. And her. She tightened her grip on the suitcase. She was given a piano. A dusty, aging, slightly out-of-tune piano. That was your husband's personal item, the lawyer had said, barely glancing at her. He insisted it goes to you, as if it were charity. As if it were nothing. The wind grew colder. It slipped through her thin coat, wrapping around her fragile frame like a reminder that she no longer had a home to return to. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and in that darkness, she heard it. A faint melody, soft, broken, familiar. Her breath caught. The piano. That same piano, sitting in the corner of the mansion's old study room, untouched for decades, covered in silence just like her. Her chest tightened. 42 years. She whispered, her voice barely audible. 42 years of devotion, of sacrifice, of becoming invisible so others could shine, and in the end, she was left with something everyone else considered worthless. A hollow laugh escaped her lips, but it wasn't bitter. Not yet. Because somewhere, deep inside her, beneath the layers of exhaustion, grief, and quiet humiliation, something still lived. Something that refused to die. She opened her eyes. The road ahead was uncertain, cold, unforgiving, but it was hers. And as she took her first step forward, the faint echo of that forgotten melody followed her, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. If you believe that a woman's worth is not defined by her age, but by her resilience, subscribe to Great Talks. We tell the stories the world tried to bury. 2. The decades of devotion. The backstory. Eleanor Whitmore was not always a woman of silence. There was a time long before the mansion, long before the years blurred together, when her world was filled with music. She had been 26 when she first met Arthur. A modest concert hall. A rainy evening. The scent of varnished wood and fresh sheet music lingering in the air. Her fingers had danced across the piano keys that night with a confidence that came from passion, not perfection. She didn't play for applause. She played because it was the only language her soul truly understood. Arthur had been sitting in the front row, watching, listening, choosing. They were young, hurt, still grieving their mother. Eleanor stepped into that space not as a replacement but as a caretaker. A quiet presence who never demanded love, only offered it. He approached her afterward with a warm smile and carefully chosen words. He admired her talent, her grace, her rare depth. No one had ever described her that way before. And slowly, carefully, he became her world. When he proposed, he promised her everything. a home, stability, a life where she would never have to struggle again. What he didn't say was what she would have to give up in return. The piano came with her when she moved into the mansion. At first, she played every morning. The sound of music echoed through the halls, softening the cold edges of the house. Even Arthur seemed pleased, at least in the beginning, but life has a way of rearranging priorities. Arthur had 2 children, Lydia and Charles. She learned their routines, their fears, their preferences. She packed lunches, stayed up through fevers, attended school meetings where no one ever asked her opinion but expected her presence, and slowly, piece by piece, she disappeared. Her mornings became schedules, her afternoons became responsibilities, her evenings became exhaustion. The piano, it grew quieter, then occasional, then silent. Maybe later, she would tell herself, once things settle. But things never settled. Arthur's business expanded, his expectations grew, his patience for distractions diminished. Music, he said gently at first, was a hobby. And hobbies were luxuries. You don't need to worry about that anymore, Eleanor, he had told her once, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at her. You have a real life now. A real life. She smiled. And she agreed. Because love, she believed, required sacrifice. Years passed. Then decades. Birthdays blurred into anniversaries. Seasons came and went like pages turning too quickly to read. She became the backbone of a household that never acknowledged her strength. Dinner was always on time. The house was always immaculate. The children know. Their children grew into successful adults. And yet, something inside her remained untouched. Not alive. Not dead. Just waiting. Sometimes late at night, she would sit in the darkened study room where the piano rested under a thin layer of dust. Her fingers would hover above the keys, but she never pressed them because she had forgotten how it felt to choose herself. Arthur aged, so did she. But where his years were marked by power, influence, and expansion, hers were marked by quiet endurance, invisible labor, unspoken devotion. And still she stayed, because she believed in loyalty, because she believed in the vows she had made, because she believed that one day it would matter. That one day someone would look at her and say, you were the reason this life worked. But that day never came. The cold betrayal, the conflict, the room felt colder than it should have, not because of the temperature but because of the people in it. Eleanor sat upright in the leather chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The same hands that had once played symphonies, now resting in silence. Across from her sat Lydia and Charles, perfectly composed, perfectly distant, and beside them the lawyer, a man who had never known her, yet held the authority to define her worth. Arthur had been gone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of condolences. 3 weeks of polite visitors. 3 weeks of silence where grief should have been shared but wasn't. And now, this, the reading of the will. Mrs. Whitmore, the lawyer began, his voice measured and clinical. We appreciate your patience during this process. Patience? She almost smiled. 42 years of patience. And still counting. He adjusted his glasses and continued. The estate, including the primary residence, investment accounts, and business holdings, will be transferred in full to Mr. Arthur Whitmore's biological children, Miss Lydia Whitmore and Mr. Charles Whitmore. The words landed like stones, heavy, final, irreversible. Eleanor didn't react. Not outwardly. Because somewhere deep inside, she had expected this. What she hadn't expected was what came next. As for you, the lawyer said, glancing briefly in her direction, Mr. Whitmore has allocated a personal item of sentimental value. A pause, almost theatrical. The grand piano located in the west study. Silence. Then Lydia exhaled sharply, a faint, amused smile touching her lips. The piano, she said, exchanging a glance with her brother. You're serious? Charles leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slightly. That old thing hasn't been touched in decades. Eleanor's fingers tightened. but she remained still. That is correct, the lawyer replied. It was specifically designated. Lydia let out a soft laugh, light, dismissive, almost pitying. Well, she said, turning to Eleanor, I suppose it suits you. Suits you. The words cut deeper than they should have, because they weren't said with cruelty, they were said with certainty. As if she had always been that insignificant, replaceable, a caretaker. Charles leaned forward, his tone more direct. Look, Eleanor, he said, not unkindly but not kindly either. Let's be realistic. You lived here comfortably for decades. Everything was taken care of. You didn't have to work. You didn't have to struggle. He paused. You were adequately compensated. The same words. Again. Like a verdict, Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes moved from one face to the other, searching for something. Recognition. Gratitude. Anything. But there was nothing. Just polite detachment. Businesslike efficiency. You may arrange to have the piano transported within the week, the lawyer added, already gathering his documents. As for the residence, we will require you to vacate within 30 days. 30 days. To erase 42 years. Eleanor nodded slowly, not because she agreed, but because she understood. This had never been her home. She had simply been allowed to live in it. As she stood to leave, Lydia's voice followed her. You'll be all right, she said lightly. You always are. Eleanor paused for just a moment. Then she continued walking, because for the first time in decades, there was nothing left to hold her in place. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of her mind, a forgotten melody began to stir. The worthless inheritance, the discovery. The piano arrived on a gray morning, not the poetic kind of gray that held promise, but a dull, heavy sky that pressed low against the earth. As if the world itself had grown tired, Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new residence, a modest, aging cottage at the edge of a quiet town. The paint was peeling, the windows were slightly crooked, and the air inside carried the faint, stale scent of long disuse, mixed with something else, loneliness. Where would you like it, ma'am? One of the movers asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. She hesitated. The piano looked even older now, outside the grandeur of the mansion. Its once polished wood was scratched, dulled by time. The keys yellowed, uneven. A relic. By the window, she said softly. The movers struggled slightly as they carried it in, the instrument heavier than it appeared. When they finally set it down, it let out a low, hollow creak as if it were exhaling after years of silence. Eleanor watched them leave. The door closed, and just like that, it was only her and the piano. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she stepped closer. The room was quiet. So quiet that she could hear the faint ticking of an old wall clock, the distant rustle of wind brushing against the trees outside. Her fingers hovered above the piano's surface, dust, a thick, undisturbed layer of it. She drew a breath, and gently, she wiped a small section clean. The wood beneath was darker than she remembered. Stronger. Still intact. Funny, she murmured, her voice barely audible. How something can look so worn and still survive. She found an old cloth in the kitchen and returned, rolling up the sleeves of her sweater, and then methodically, patiently she began to clean. Each movement was deliberate, each stroke almost reverent. As if she were not just restoring an object but reclaiming a part of herself. Dust rose into the air, catching the faint light that filtered through the window. It smelled of enclosed years, of forgotten moments, of time that had settled quietly, undisturbed. She coughed lightly, pausing for a moment before continuing. Her hands moved across the lid, the edges, the intricate carvings along the sides. She opened the top panel. A soft creak. The sound echoed in the small room. Inside, the strings, slightly tarnished, but not broken, still breathing. She whispered. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the keys. For a moment, she hesitated. 42 years. 42. Years since she had last allowed herself this simple act. Her index finger pressed down. A note rang out. Soft, fragile, slightly out of tune, but unmistakably alive. Her breath caught. Another key, then another. The melody didn't come easily. It stumbled. It faltered. Just like her. But it was there. And for the first time in decades, she didn't stop herself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she kept playing. Because this time, no one was there to tell her it didn't matter. And no one was there to silence her. The music filled the room, imperfect, broken, but real. After a while, her hand slowed. The final note lingered in the air before dissolving into silence. She sat still, her chest rising and falling gently. Then something caught her attention, a slight resistance. One of the keys. It hadn't moved as smoothly as the others. Her brow furrowed. She pressed it again. It stuck. Strange. Leaning closer, she examined it carefully. The key seemed slightly raised, misaligned, not broken, just off. Curiosity stirred. She reached for a small knife from the kitchen and returned. Kneeling beside the piano, carefully, very carefully, she slid the thin blade along the edge of the key. A soft click. The key lifted. Eleanor froze. Beneath it was a gap, not empty, but filled. Her heart began to pound. Slowly, she reached inside. Her fingers brushed against paper, old paper, delicate. Her breath quickened as she gently pulled it out. A folded sheet, yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Music, notation, precise, complex, beautiful. Her eyes scanned the page, recognition dawning slowly like light breaking through darkness. No, she whispered. It couldn't be. She pulled out another sheet, then another, dozens of them, carefully hidden beneath the keys, protected, preserved. Her chest tightened as realization struck. This wasn't just sheet music, this was a composition. An original, and not just any composition. Her voice shook. This is a symphony. Her mind raced. Fragments of memory surfaced. Arthur's late nights. The study door closed. The faint sound of music she had once dismissed as imagination. But Arthur had never played. Never written. Then who? Her fingers trembled as she reached deeper into the hidden compartment. And there a small envelope. Sealed. With her name written on it. Eleanor. Her breath caught. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The ink slightly faded but still legible. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. The grand revealed a transformation, my dearest Eleanor. The handwriting was unmistakable, Arthur's. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and that the world as I have built it has revealed its true nature to you. Her fingers tightened around the paper. I owe you more apologies than this letter can contain. But I also owe you the truth. A tear slipped down her cheek. The piano was never just a piano. Her eyes moved faster now. Many years ago, before I became the man the world sees, I knew someone, a composer, a genius the world never recognized. His work was dismissed, stolen, ignored. He died believing his music would never matter. Eleanor's breath grew shallow. Before his death, he entrusted me with his final composition, a symphony unlike anything I had ever heard. He called it the Lost Symphony. He believed it would change everything, if it ever found the right hands. Her hands trembled uncontrollably now. I did not have the courage to bring it to light. I chose ambition over integrity. I buried it just as I buried many truths in my life. A pause, a shift in tone. But I never forgot. You, Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. You were the only person in my life who understood music not as sound but as soul. You gave up everything, and I let you. Her breath broke. This is my final attempt to give something back. Tears blurred her vision. The symphony hidden within this piano is worth more than anything I have left behind. Not just in money but in legacy. Her hands shook as she read the final lines. They will see it as nothing, just as they saw you, but I know what you are worth. Now, it is time for the world to know it too. Arthur's silence filled the room. Heavy, sacred. Eleanor sat motionless, the letter resting in her lap. The sheets of music scattered around her like fragments of a life she had almost forgotten. Her mind struggled to process it. All of it. The betrayal. The truth. The hidden gift. They will see it as nothing. A hollow laugh escaped her lips, this time different. Not bitter. Not broken. Awakened. Slowly, she looked around the room, the peeling walls, the quiet space, the piano. Her piano. No, she whispered, her voice gaining strength. Not anymore. She gathered the sheets carefully, her movements no longer hesitant but precise, deliberate. Every note, every page, handled with the respect it deserved, because now, she understood, this wasn't just a discovery. It was a restoration. Of truth. Of identity. Of power. The next few days passed in a blur of purpose. For the first time in decades, Eleanor moved with direction. She researched, called archives, contacted music historians. At first, they were dismissive, polite, uninterested, until she sent them a single page, one movement, one fragment of the symphony. The response came within hours. Urgent. Disbelieving. Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand what you have? The voice on the phone trembled. This is extraordinary. Another call. Then another. Experts, collectors, institutions, all asking the same question. Where did you find this? Eleanor stood by the window, the phone in her hand. The late afternoon sun casting a soft glow across the room. Her reflection stared back at her, older. Yes, but no longer invisible. I didn't find it, she said, calmly. It was left for me. There was a pause. On the other end, then Mrs. Whitmore. This could be worth millions. She closed her eyes briefly. Millions. The word meant nothing. And everything. Because for the first time, it wasn't about survival. It was about recognition. I'm not interested in selling it, she replied. Another pause. Then, what would you like to do? Eleanor looked at the piano. The keys. The place where silence had once lived, and where music had returned. Her voice was steady. I want the world to hear it. The days that followed marked the beginning of something no one, not Lydia, not Charles, not even Arthur, had ever anticipated. Eleanor Whitmore was no longer a footnote in someone else's story. She was the author now, and the symphony, it would be her voice, louder than anything they had ever tried to silence.